Zeynep Sayilgan is someone who is very interested and very busy in interfaith relations. But let's take just a step back, a Turkish background, but then growing up in Germany. Tell me what that was like as a Muslim before you came to the U.S.
Yes, I'd be happy to. So yes, like you said, I was born, raised in Germany as the daughter of Muslim immigrants who came from Turkey. Now the new, the new conventional name, or Turkey. Um, so what it was like, I think it was hard in the beginning. I think when I look back into my upbringing, and I love Germany. It's one of my places that I call home. My family, friends, all live there. Um, I majored in German literature. I love, the German culture, the German old cities, and all of that. But I think it's still hard to be a Muslim in Germany as a Muslim woman in Germany, because religion is not very much out there in the public sphere. And even if you are a regular churchgoer as a Christian, and you bring that up in a conversation, it probably would cause for some interesting reactions. So,
Mm.
being as a Muslim child, I grew up in the public school system, and was already visibly, by my name, by my whole being. I was out there. I started wearing my headscarf, which is an expression of my Muslim faith, early in middle school. And teachers, most of my German teachers were very, so I have experienced a lot of bullying and discrimination. And that was, I think, hard as a Muslim child to see that adults who are educators, who are supposed to be supportive and encouraging in your educational journey, actually were very were very were belittling you, were discriminating you. And there are studies now who show that it's a very, sadly, very strong attitude that comes from the middle of German society. And it was a painful experience, because you, as a Muslim child, any child, wants to belong and wants to feel part of their community. And when you get the signal from the larger mainstream society that you are not welcomed the way you are, because you are too different, or you are too religious, you appear too religious, then that, of course, creates a lot of hurt. I think I still carry bitterness and resentment with me at times, looking back, that I felt my country did not see my potential or didn't appreciate me. And I think it's their loss. And I eventually left, because I faced challenges, obstacles in the workforce, trying to apply as a scholar, as an academic, was especially, it's still very hard. It's become a little bit easier, but as a Muslim woman who is dressed in a certain way, and when you have your picture on your job application, or even if you have just a Muslim sounding name, you experience a lot of rejection. Or I had people in interviews telling me, take off your scarf, or principals calling me into their office, if you don't give up your Muslim identity, you'll face a lot of trouble. So
Mm.
that was this constant. It was a harassment, discrimination, on the job market, in the school system. And that is still a reality. I'm very much in touch with my friends and family in Germany, and there's still a lot of hurt and disappointment. What is it that after 40, I'm 45 now, after all these years, we're still, uh, we're not making enough progress. I think still have changed positively. I don't want to sound too pessimistic. So that was the climate that I grew up in. I wish I could say, oh, everything was just rosy and gloomy. And of course, I have a lot of good experiences, but just being as a Muslim was not something that was embraced in
Yeah,
German
I'm
society.
sorry for that discrimination. And when you first mentioned bullying, I thought, well, I hope the teachers came to the rescue. But when you mentioned, oh, that was the adults, that's very eye-opening. And
Yes.
then,
Yeah, and I think especially, those were the teachers who would hand out the diary of the Anne Frank and that we would read, but couldn't understand that they are inflicting the same injury on other children.
how different was it when you came to the U.S.?
So it's been now almost 20 years. I came here after I finished my graduate studies in Germany. I did Islamic studies and I came back to pursue some more my doctoral studies. And so far, I mean, I have not lived in all parts of the United States, and I can't speak for all Muslim women, but my own particular experience was a positive one. That when I came, that my difference and diverse background was something that was valued, welcomed, appreciated, and seen as a richness to the academic field. So the languages that I spoke, the cultures that I was connected and immersed in, and I think that's the beauty of immigrants, that they bring to the country, that their rich background, the languages, the experiences. And so as a Muslim woman, as a Muslim student, I had good experiences. I mean, there was at one institution where I was hired as the only Muslim faculty, where one gentleman reached out and wrote a very disturbing letter asking why the administration had hired a terrorist. And so that was one incident where I felt, oh, but I mean, the reality is that there is a persistent negative image about Islam and Muslims, and that hovers over me, and I'm hyper aware of that.
Just to fill in a little bit for our audience, Dr. Zeynep, I want to mention your education, that you do have your doctorate. Zeynep Sayilgan is someone who works in interfaith spaces, and what you've just shared us tells us a lot about why. You're the host of the podcast on being Muslim, and you're a Muslim scholar at the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies there in Baltimore, where you're speaking to me from. Before I get into some of your specialties, what was it that made you easily could have said, I am just going to head on my path, keep my head down, and not engage with this discrimination or this misunderstanding, but you really have taken part in what feels like to me is trying to create some dialogue and some understanding. Was there some moment, or did you just feel that from the beginning as a sense of mission?
Yeah, I think a lot of us bring ourselves to our work. So my autobiography, my own personal experience with growing up as a Muslim shaped my interest in who I wanted to become. I think I bring myself fully to this work because I embody this dialogue. I was
Mm.
always, I have a very German critical mind. Like, there was always this sense of suspicion towards religion, and I always feel the internal dialogue that I'm making. Like, in a sense, I embody the conversation between the East and the West, and Islam and the West, and I can anticipate the questions and objections, the conversation between the secular and the sacred.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel that's a blessing. I see it as a privilege that I now come to see. I mean, I think when I was younger, I kind of, oh, I don't want to be conflicted, but I now feel like, no, there are these two aspects of me who want to make sense of faith and religion in the modern world, about tradition and science, and the conversation between religion and science. So I see myself, I think growing up in Germany was truly a privilege, a blessing, really, that I want to use that religious language, because it helped me to really appreciate and understand where people are coming from. Because I'm not somebody who is a person of faith, of conviction, because they were told, or their ancestors,
Right.
passed it on to them. But I grew up in in an environment, educational system, that values critical thinking, analytical thinking, and rationality. I mean, you think about all the German philosophers and all of that. So for me, my whole journey, actually, I realized if I don't tell my story, my narrative, nobody else will. And that slowly brought me, or gradually brought me, to this whole work of religious literacy and interreligious understanding, because I realized in my communities there's a lot of misconceptions about the other. And I wanted to be to be somebody who helps, who brings communities closer, who helps them understand each other. And I saw my own context as an asset later on. And I think that really, even in my writing and thinking, I'm like, what would a person say who's not affiliated to any religion? What would they object here? What are the questions? So I think I saw myself gradually. I initially wanted to become a journalist, so I started writing at and actually worked at radio stations in Germany, where I went. I would go on the street and just interview people about
Mm.
all sorts of things. But I had a love for writing, I loved reading, and I loved people. So it all just came naturally together. But I love being a Muslim. I love my tradition. And I wanted people to understand that, to see the beauty that I'm experiencing, because I couldn't recognize my religion in that persistent negative portrayal of Islam. And I would be scared and run away if that's all what Islam is about. So I thought to myself, instead of complaining about the darkness, you have to do something about it. And so I think that very much brought me to the academic field of Christian Muslim relations, in particular, interreligious understanding, and also learning from my non Muslim students. What is it that we Muslims are doing wrong, or what can we do better? Where are we not making, where do we, do some more explanation? So slowly it became, I think that's then everything came beautifully together. And then I felt I can, you know, I love the research, I love the teaching and the community building, and that's what brought me to this work.
You used a phrase I hope that I can use more in my life, which is religious literacy. I mean, that is what we do on In Good Faith. We're trying to encourage that, but I don't know that we've used those two words together.
Yeah.
That we as just human beings become literate in the religious beliefs and practices of our neighbors all around us.
Mm-hmm.
And probably, I'm guessing you've seen some people even abandon their faith or their tradition just because life was easier.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, that is an option any of us have is sort
Right.
of say, well, I'm just not going to stick with this. It's causing me too many problems. But I admire your approach. You co-edited Faithful Neighbors with Robert Heaney, and I'm wondering, in putting together a collection of essays like that, what did you learn from the people who contributed about living together with people of different beliefs, more of that religious literacy?
I think I mean, what I've learned in one of the essays is that there is sometimes this anxiety. I'm not religiously literate enough to enter into a dialogue with another religious person, or I don't know enough about my own religion, about the other religion or I'm not an expert to
Mm-hmm.
come into to this conversation. And what actually studies show is you don't need to be an expert. You become the beauty of dialogue is when you come and enter this conversation, you enter into a dialogue with yourself first. You become more self-aware of who you are, more self-conscious, You more step into dialogue and trying to understand, oh, what are my values, my beliefs?
Hmm.
How do I look at this issue? And another fear is, or concern is, that people think, oh, I'm going to lose my religion, my identity in the process of dialogue, which again is confirmed as not true. In fact, dialogue brings you closer to yourself and brings you also closer to the other, because the other, your conversation partner, then encourages you to uh, look more deeply into your tradition, into your own world. And I think that for me was the beauty, that even now, uh, those studies show that you become a better practitioner, a better religious believer. And even if you're not affiliated with any religious tradition, you become a better global citizen. I mean, people say, I'm not a religious person, why should I even engage? But we now live in this global village. I think it's important for us to know how a huge segment of the global population orient themselves in the world. There are 2 billion Muslims currently living on this planet. And with Christians together, they make up half of the population, of the global population. So I
Yeah.
think if we make an effort, if we see that we have a certain responsibility towards each other, to know how does the other orient themselves in the world, well, how do they think about some of the most existential questions or some of the shared human struggles. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's not something that only religious people should do. It's something that I would love more people to talk in schools, in other institutions, in libraries, because religion is still meaningful and is important to a lot of people. And we should ask, why is that?
Yeah.
Like, how is it that this tradition still continues to sustain for 1500 years, or Christianity or another tradition, uh, a big part of the human family. And so I see it very integral. If I'm a mother, and I would love for my daughter to have a basic understanding, some literacy about the people, the fellow human beings with whom she shares this planet. And what are their favorite holidays? What are their favorite moments? What do they care about? I think,
That's curiosity.
yeah, curiosity, just be simple curiosity. And what a beautiful thing if we can have more of that in healthy ways, in respectful ways, in civic dialogue. Instead of, and oftentimes with religion in the public sphere, we hear the loud and the extreme voices, but those are not the people who I see in my day-to-day living. I mean, they're people who are extremely kind and loving and love their traditions. And I think those voices I would love to see more up and be more confident in sharing that.
Well, you have obviously a foot in the academic world, your degree in theological and religious studies from Georgetown. But then there's this very practical and kind of where the rubber meets the road aspect, which uh, I find myself wondering what you see that is most helpful, for instance, in Christian Muslim relations. Is it just that people get over their fear enough to ask a question like, what is Ramadan, or whatever it might be? Are those the things that do the most for bringing people together?
I would just, come back to what you said. It's curiosity, but also yesterday or somewhere I've read in a meeting, and we've read it. I've read it in an essay a colleague shared, but it's I see it as um, connecting with one another in your neighborhood, just starting from a micro level.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I would call honoring the social contract. I mean, I'm in this office right now. This office was not built by me. There were a number of people involved. And just understanding that I'm not an entity just living to myself. I am an interdependent human being who is connected intimately with other human beings. That's the social contract for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, how do I honor the social contract? Do I make an effort to get to know my neighbor? And I think for me, it starts in the neighborhood. I grew up I come from a very simple background, immigrant, first generation college student. And I'm always interested in how the regular person on the ground can do this work. And we call it connective labor. Connecting to a human being is work. Yeah, right. It's labor, it's hard work, but it's a great investment. And especially in this time now where a lot of our human social connections are getting disintegrated, it's more important than ever. So I started my neighborhood. When I moved in my neighborhood, nobody told me go door to door and give invitations and say, hello neighbors, I just moved in, can we have a bonfire, let's I wanted people to know me, because I know they will see me as a Muslim. I'm very visibly a Muslim. I would love for people to have a chance to get to know me, who I am. Like I said earlier, I know that what the image looks like and the fear, and
Yeah.
people have concerns. So I felt the obligation. I want to reach out to my neighbors. I want to give them a chance to meet me and get to know me. So I think for me, it's really always, I come back to the micro circle. We make an impact in our neighborhoods.
Yeah.
The activism, yes, these are wonderful things. But if I don't know the neighbor next to me, what point, I mean, what kind of impact can I make in the world, right? So it starts from that, and then it flows into the macro circles for
Well,
me.
if you had moved into my neighborhood, I would have hoped that you knocked on my door and said,
Oh, I would.
my grandmother has the best baklava recipe. Are you
Oh,
interested in learning about that? I said, I'll be there tomorrow. That would be,
and it's really the simple things. Have a cup of tea together. Have
Mhm.
share a meal together. They had this amazing study in Norway, which was called A Cup of Tea, and
Mm.
they've done it with where Muslims signed up and hosted their non-Muslim neighbors or people who wanted to be part of this. And then after a certain time, they looked how the Islamophobia index went down just by sharing a cup of tea together. And what we're doing right now, just meeting somebody from a human level. I mean,
Hmm.
it's not just reading a textbook on Islam 101, but what is your story? Tell me about your story. Tell me about the family culture you grew up in. I'm really interested. What was it like for you? And those are the things that I'm interested in, because those things I don't learn in a textbook. I learn from sitting with a human being, a real human being, and trying to cultivate the art of listening. Um, that's what I'm hoping to see more. And I don't see that enough in our world.
In your podcast on being Muslim, you focus on wisdom from, and then you mention, I don't know how to pronounce it, Risale-i Nur.
Yes, very good. Yeah, Risale-i Nur. Yeah.
What does that mean, and what is the wisdom that you want to discuss and share in that?
So the Risale-i Nur is a commentary on the Quran. It's written by a Muslim scholar a contemporary Muslim scholar who lived um, in the 20th century, who've experienced a lot of the things that I experienced as a Muslim in the modern world, or as a
Hmm.
believer in the modern world. So that's why I think the work and his writing spoke to me. It's Risale-i Nur. Risale-i Nur means the message of light, or the epistles of light, and primarily focuses on questions about how to make sense of religion in the modern time. How do I approach God in a world where now God is on the margins? How do I make sense of science? How do I read the cosmos? Um, how do I think about religious difference? Who am I in this world with all my, amazing emotions and faculties? So for me, growing up, I was, in my high school years where I came across this work. And I attended some of the spiritual gatherings, and it spoke to me profoundly. I felt, wow, this is something that really nurtures my head, but also my heart, my whole self. And I wanted to share it with the world. I wanted to say, this is a work who has informed my own spiritual journey. And if it helped me, maybe it can also be helpful to you. And it's one of the works that is not sufficiently known yet. And so, as somebody who reads it in the original Ottoman Turkish language, it's now translated into English. And also, theology is not something that people associate with Islam. I've even heard people saying, "Oh, Islam doesn't have a theology; it's just law and rituals." And that's very offensive because and comes from a place of ignorance, because Muslims have a deep theology. Muslims talk about God all the time, reflect about Him and about God, about the divine. So that's, for me, the podcast was a way to uplift my own Muslim female voice as a scholar. I think that's also absent from the, Muslim women scholarly voices are absent in the theological conversation. So there were several efforts, and then also help people to come to this work. And I do a lot of personal sharing. I'm not just sitting there reading, but I see, oh, this is how I apply this, or how I reflect on this in my particular context.
You're affiliated faculty with Virginia, speaking of theology, Virginia Theological Seminary. I wonder what courses you teach, and what are they, as a theological seminary, hoping that you can share as a Muslim and a scholar with their students?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for me, so what I usually, or what I traditionally teach, are introductory classes on Islam, or chaplaincy classes. So a lot of the students, come from across the nation, from different parts of the Episcopal Church, different dioceses, right? And so they are leaders of congregations, and in their particular context, they might be dealing with religious difference in their neighborhoods, in their congregations, or Muslim communities on the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or and even globally. So how do we equip religious leaders of tomorrow with that literacy, that interreligious literacy, to make sense of difference in the world? How can they guide their communities and taking away the fear and bringing more understanding? And a lot of the seminarians also serve in as chaplains, as hospital chaplains. So I had chaplains approach most seminarians, or I have Muslim patients in my hospital or my hospice. How do I serve them? How do I care for them? So I think it just comes, this basic question about, how do I care for all of God's creation? Simple. I mean, you don't. It's for me, that is where I'm passionate about this work, and helping to equip um, future priests and clergy and chaplains with sufficient knowledge and practical skills, so they can go out in the world and say, I have I have some skills, I have some literacy. I can also educate my congregation, or help the hospital staff understand how to take care of Muslim patients or clients. So those are the more we are becoming more diverse as a nation, as a world. People encounter diversity and difference in different settings, in schools, in colleges, hospitals, prisons. And how do we make sure that we have some basic skills in place? So that's where I come in, as an insider, outsider, who helps them, who guides them in that kind of interreligious learning. So I taught classes on women in Islam, interreligious chaplaincy in multi-religious settings. I've done a class on the Prophet Muhammad, because he is one that who is important for the Muslim community. Um, so just, I think, I would say any religious leader in formation or needs to have those skills in place to be a future leader.
Do you have a sense that you've been led to what you're doing, that God is working in your life to put you where you are, give you even some difficult experiences to build on? Do you look at it that way, or do you see it differently?
Yeah, when I was at the seminary, I heard a lot of the students always say, it's my calling, my
Mm,
vocation, or
mm,
God called me to do this work. And they were lawyers or doctors, and they've given up everything. And I've never heard that language in that particular way, but I definitely, as a Muslim person, I think that our lives are not just happening coincidentally, that our past is, um, God allowed for the past and our experiences, and all of them have wisdom and purpose. Even the painful experiences, I
mhm,
now cherish, and I'm grateful for them because they really helped me to be the person who can do this work today. So now I look back. In that moment, of course, I couldn't see that it is something that I should, embrace. But now I think definitely God, every event, I think from an Islamic theological perspective, everything in our lives is a sign, a miraculous event unfolding something about the divine. If we can approach it as a letter from God and try to read and reflect and ponder about the meanings, why did this happen to me? What's the reason? What's the purpose? And can I now take this experience and write a beautiful ending with God's permission? That I had no influence on the beginning of my story, where I was born, how I was raised up, the people in my life. But wow, now I can decide about the end. I can write a beautiful ending, taking all that amazing experience, the painful and the joyful, and write a beautiful ending. And I think that's where our freedom lies. I can either be a victim or
mm,
label myself as a victim, or say, no, I have agency. I can decide what to do with that painful experience, or that you know that sadness, or even the injustice that I faced. But how can I make this now a work of justice, a work of compassion, a work of forgiveness? So I think that's where I landed now in my humble experience. I see it now. I see everything and think, oh, it's perfect. It's all what I needed to experience
mm.
to now move forward and write that beautiful ending. And I think uh, God is working in these events. Like, these events are not happening without wisdom, without purpose. When I look at the cosmos, I see in everything always beauty, wisdom, and purpose. It cannot be that the highest level of life, the human being, just like lives their lives, and there's no deeper meaning to it. I This is something that I just don't embrace. So absolutely, I think God was working in all of this, and I couldn't always understand the divine work. But now I feel like I've come to. I think it makes you more mature, and a life lived without suffering or pain or sadness is not a human life lived fully or experienced fully, I feel, because the spectrum of human life is to it's the sun and the moon, it's the lunar and the solar. It's not always the happy and the
Mm.
rosy. And often growth happens in the very painful moments in your life. And I've experienced that. I still continue to experience that. And that's what I would love to convey. It doesn't mean that in darkness or pain or suffering, God's creative work stops. He didn't abandon me. He didn't reject me. In fact, there's still growth happening. If we can see that, open our hearts, I think that's a beautiful insight to come. Yeah.
I really appreciate, I think, the patience you've had to develop when people speak out of misunderstanding or misconceptions, and they just don't know yet. But that's still very inconvenient for the people who are the brunt of that.
All
So
right.
one thing I would love to ask here is, what do you love most? about Islam, about the teachings and the traditions and your faith. What brings you joy, and what makes you just very happy that you're part of that?
Yeah, there's so much to share, but I feel for me, Islam is a tradition that really addresses all my needs and
Hmm.
nourishes all my needs, whether it's the physical, the spiritual, the intellectual, the emotional. I feel truly sustained and strengthened and nourished. And there's always a sweet challenge in Islam. It's something that there is, that sweet struggle, and that leads to transcendent of the ego and self-transformation that I really appreciate. I love
Hmm.
also the social aspect of it. How when you go into the community, see the sea of diverse people, yet you can share in the most sacred moments together. It gives you a shared sacred holy language
Hmm.
and a shared orientation to the world. And I remember this one incident. I was in the hospital and it was prayer time. So I found that beautiful Interfaith chapel, and I entered, and then a nurse came in, and I could see she's from Somalia, and it's just her background. And she just asked me, "Are you starting to pray?" And I said yes. And then she joined me, and we were praying together. And I mean, here we are, like complete two strangers, but we could share that most sacred, most intimate moment together. And we had this shared vocabulary, the language, the rituals. We could talk about death and life, and we could understand each other. I mean, it was a powerful moment for me, to a testament to the unity that Islam has created. Like um, and that I found deeply moving and touching. And I love being in that cosmopolitan community. And I see that, I host a women's gathering every Wednesday, a spiritual gathering. And it's just always astonishes me. I mean, I'm like with these strangers, but we talk about lives, about death, about suffering, about painful experiences, about the raw things. And where can you do that if not in this kind of spiritual community
Hmm.
that allows you to address the whole human experience? And it's not, usually you in public life, you celebrate the accolades, the birthdays, the graduations, but where can you really be totally you? And I think those are in those religious spaces. You also talk about the the dimension of the unseen, the afterlife, the pain that is unseen, the sadness, the sorrow. And for me, that is a very beautiful, very powerful element in the Islamic tradition that doesn't shy away to talk about the difficult topics with strangers. And I'm grateful for that. Yeah.
Thank you. That sounds like a lovely meeting that I will never be invited to, but I'm I'm glad it's happening. Every religion has a starting place, like a geographical place. So the Arabian Peninsula, for instance,
Yeah.
or in many great traditions in India. But then as they spread, I'm, I'm wondering, how does the place, and I realize we've taken the time that we asked you for. So if you need to go, please just let me know. But I'm curious, you mentioned being a mother. So you're raising your children in yet a different place than you were raised in, which is a different place than your parents were raised in. And
Yeah.
so here is Islam and this tradition traveling through different cultures, societies. Uh, what are you hopeful for your children's future as Muslims in the States here?
Yes, I think for me, as an immigrant, of course, when I was a child, you think, the discourse, and I think that came with modernity and the nation state, that your identity is tied to a territory,
Hmm.
or that your identity needs to be tied to a place or country. And as I studied the Quran and my own tradition, I actually realized there's even no geography is not that important, meaning that your religious core is not tied to a certain, it cannot be narrowed down. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
what I have 3 passports, German, Turkish, American, but none of them captures my being. Like, it means that I cannot say my sense of belonging is only tied to this one place or space or territory. And I think that has come with my research in immigration, that I realized the Quran makes you so much bigger. You are a human being that has a spirit, and that spirit is not, cannot be contained by a certain material place or territory. It's still important, the place. I mean, we are spatial beings. We start somewhere, like you said, but the ruh, the spirit, is a non-material entity, is wider than the earth. It's not just a worldly entity. So what the Quran refers to, you are bigger than just than the earth. You have to expand. And while it's true that the heartland of Islam is the Arabian Peninsula, there is a certain, it pushes you out, but also I think there's an invitation to expand your humanity, to expand your sense of self, because you are body, you are spirit, you are heart, but you're not a territorial being only. And I think a lot of times in my childhood or upbringing, it was like, are you German? Are you Turkish? Are you this? Where do you belong? And you realize, especially with an immigrant upbringing, that you love all of these places. You can't be contained by walls and borders. And in fact, that's a very modern and recent notion, and which limits actually people, because those are constructed ideas. And the Quran wants us to, like, I mean, in the Islamic tradition, this idea of you are a heavenly being because you are going to return to your celestial origins. So I'm hopeful. I tell, sense of belonging is not about just a place, but about how much you can connect with like-minded people. And the notion of home, I mean, in the Islamic tradition, we are called to be in this world like a traveler or stranger. We should not fully settle, and there's a beauty in that. You should be comfortable being in the in between, because you're constantly in this mode of traveling and learning and feeling a little bit unsettled and feeling okay of being a stranger in the world, which sounds negative in a way, but it's not, because when you are a traveler, you try to show up as your best self. You try to make the most of every moment, but you also know that you can depart anytime. So for me as a mother now, I'm trying to say, wherever we are, wherever God has placed us, we can find beauty and goodness, and wisdom. And there's not one country who owns it. God has blessed all cultures and countries with beauties and wisdom and creativity, and wherever we can find it, that's where we also belong. All right. So this notion of I can only be happy in one place, and this nostalgia, I experienced that with my parents. They've never really made an effort um, to belong, because there's this notion, I will return back, I will return back, I will go home. But they never went home. I mean, now they have grandchildren. So wherever I am placed, I'll bring myself fully there, mentally, intellectually, emotionally. And God has placed me here. So I'll try to show up in the best way. But I also don't claim that only this place can make me happy. I think we are in that, I think it's a type of liberation theology, that you are free. You are a free human being. So don't narrow yourself down to one place.
Zeynep Sayilgan, I'm sort of wanting to take all of your classes, because you throw off interesting concepts just left and right because of what you've thought about, what you've studied. It's a joy to get to speak with you. It's a privilege. I appreciate it. I want to say Dankeschön. I want to say teşekkürler ederim, and thank you so much. And finally, is there something I should have asked you that I didn't know to ask?
No, thank you. If I may, Steve, that I think I really enjoyed talking to you, and thank you for listening and allowing me to share.